Look at this map from the 15th century. You can see Europe, somewhat accurately represented. There's Asia, Africa, the Middle East. But there's something off about this map, something completely fabricated. Surrounding the world is a giant landmass. It stretches from the bottom of Africa to Eastern Asia. For centuries, explorers risked everything to find a continent that doesn't exist. A mythical southern landmass that promised untold riches to whoever found it first. This isn't a story about discovery. It's a story how our most fundamental human desires, for wealth, for knowledge, for meaning, can reshape how we see our world. This quest for the southern continent drove exploration for over 2,000 years and completely transformed the way we understand our planet. This is the first part in a series where we look at how fantasy and reality collide to create history's greatest geographical misconceptions. Ancient Greek philosophers were convinced that the world needed balance. This theory first appeared in the writings of Aristotle around the year 350 BCE. His ideas influenced cartographers for millennia afterward. The theory was simple. The known northern lands, Europe, Africa, and Asia, needed a counterweight in the south. This hypothetical continent was called Terra Australis incognita, the unknown southern land. Ancient Greeks calculated that the southern continent should cover around the same area as the northern ones. And they kind of do. But the shape, location, and nature of these landmasses, that's where fantasy took over. By the time of Ptolemy in the 2nd century CE, Terra Australis was a standard feature on world maps. When European powers launched their age of exploration in the 15th century, finding Terra Australis became a primary objective. So why the obsession? For one, religious authorities endorsed the idea. Many medieval scholars believe that Terra Australis was actually the Garden of Eden, preserved by God at the unreachable bottom of the world. But the real motivation was much more practical. Gold, spices, land, power. Terra Australis wasn't just a hypothetical continent. It was perhaps the largest, richest, unclaimed territory on Earth. In 1570, cartographer Abraham Ortelius published what many consider the first modern world atlas. His depiction of Terra Australis was enormous, stretching across the entire southern hemisphere and containing the enticing label, Nundum Cognita, not yet known. These maps fueled the imaginations of explorers, merchants, and monarchs across Europe. Ferdinand Magellan's expedition in 1520 discovered the strait that now bears his name, a passage from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean at the southern tip of South America. Its discovery had a strange effect. It simultaneously proved that South America wasn't part of Terra Australis, while also seeming to confirm that Terra Australis must lie just beyond. After all, something had to be channeling the waters through that strait. In 1606, Portuguese navigator Pedro Fernandes de Queiroz believed he had finally found it. He landed on what he thought was the edge of Terra Australis and named it the Australia del Espiritu Santo, combining Austral, southern, with Austria to honor the Habsburg dynasty. Queiroz described his discovery in grandiose terms. His reports triggered a frenzy of interest. What Queiroz actually found was an island which is now part of the country Vanuatu, but his conviction was absolute. He died still believing he had discovered the edge of Terra Australis. The Dutch entered the hunt in the early 17th century. In 1642, Abel Tasman was commissioned by the Dutch East India Company. Tasman discovered Tasmania and New Zealand, but crucially, he only discovered the edges of the lands. The gaps in his maps left open the possibility that New Zealand might be the northernmost part of a still vast, undiscovered continent. Meanwhile, Dutch navigators had also encountered the west coast of Australia, but they didn't realize its significance. They called it New Holland and considered it a relatively worthless desert shore, possibly connected to Terra Australis but not the wealthy paradise they sought. Enter Captain James Cook. The British explorer was commissioned in 1768 with a specific mandate: find Terra Australis. His instructions from the Admiralty were explicit. There is reason to believe that a continent or land of great extent may be found to the southward. He was ordered to search until he either found it or definitively proved that it didn't exist. Cook's first voyage mapped the entire east coast of Australia and circumnavigated New Zealand, proving it was two islands, not part of a continent. This was a pivotal moment. Cook had proven that Australia and New Zealand were islands, not the northern edges of a vast southern continent. But the dream of Terra Australis survived. Cartographers and theorists simply pushed it farther south, beyond where Cook had sailed. Between 1772 and 1775, he circumnavigated the globe at an extreme southern latitude, crossing the Antarctic Circle multiple times. They encountered nothing but ice. Cook's conclusion was definitive. I have now done with the southern Pacific Ocean, and flatter myself that no one will think I have left it unexplored. In other words, the Terra Australis of myth, the massive, habitable, resource-rich continent, did not exist. In 1820, Russian explorer Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen sighted what we now know is Antarctica. Ironically, a continent did exist at the South Pole, but this wasn't the Terra Australis of legend. Antarctica is uninhabitable, covered in ice, and devoid of indigenous human populations or accessible natural resources. The opposite of the paradise explorers had imagined. The real Antarctica was first reached in 1895, when Norwegian explorers made the first confirmed landing. So what do we make of Terra Australis? Is it just a 2,000-year-old mistake? The story tells us something profound about human nature. We don't just explore the world, we imagine it first and try to make reality conform to our expectations. This pattern repeats throughout history. Christopher Columbus sailed west looking for Asia and found the Americas. Explorers searched for the Northwest Passage and mapped much of North America. But there's a darker side to this story too. The pursuit of Terra Australis wasn't just about knowledge, it was about conquest. European powers were searching for new lands to claim, new peoples to subjugate, new resources to extract. When Europeans finally reached Australia, they encountered Aboriginal people who had lived there for over 65,000 years. These weren't just empty lands waiting to be discovered. They were home to complex civilizations with deep connections to the territory. This pattern repeated across the globe. In New Zealand, Southern Africa, and South America, the pursuit of Terra Australis brought European powers into contact with indigenous populations, often with devastating consequences. The myth of Terra Australis represents both the boundless curiosity and the darker ambitions of human exploration, altering the course of history, even though the landmass itself was nothing more than a legend. In the end, Terra Australis remains a paradox, a continent that never existed, yet changed the world forever.